Hey, did you know that around 85% of you watching aren't subscribed? If you're enjoying the content, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. It really helps out. Thanks. I met Kylie through one of those dating apps that people pretend they hate but use constantly. Her profile was full of stuff like hiking, crystals, and positive energy, but she had a cool smile, and she actually messaged first. We talked for maybe a week before making plans. I suggested a movie or grabbing food, but she said trampoline parks were her thing, said it kept the inner child alive. I didn't care either way. I just wanted to meet her and see if the vibe was real. We went to this indoor trampoline place about 20 minutes outside of town, kind of out in the middle of nowhere, like behind an abandoned strip mall. Not sketchy exactly, just odd. It was mostly empty when we got there. A couple of birthday parties were happening in the far corner, and there was this weird echo of screaming kids bouncing off the padded walls. It smelled like rubber and old socks. But she seemed excited, so I went with it. Kylie was dressed like she was about to do gymnastics at the Olympics. Hair in a tight ponytail, neon leggings, wristbands. She even brought her own grippy socks. I laughed a bit, but she was dead serious about it. She said bouncing realigned her frequency. Again, weird, but whatever. The first 20 minutes were fun, not gonna lie. I hadn't jumped on a trampoline since I was a kid, and it was way more exhausting than I remembered. We raced across foam pits, did flips into ball pits, all that. She was really into it, especially the dodgeball court. She didn't hold back at all. She nailed some 10-year-old kid straight in the face with a ball and just laughed. It was kind of funny at first. Then it wasn't. So we're bouncing on this long runway thing, and she tries to do a cartwheel mid-jump. One of her legs lands weird, and she just collapses. Not like a graceful fall, like a full body slap. I thought she was joking at first, just laying there in dramatic fashion. But then she started crying. Not screaming or yelling, but this high-pitched whine that just kept going. She said she twisted her ankle and couldn't move. I offered to help her up, and she kind of leaned on me like she was a wounded soldier or something. We sat on the edge of one of the platforms while she cradled her foot. It didn't look swollen. It wasn't bruised. But she kept saying it was unbearable, like she'd broken it. Staff came over, asked if they should call someone. She waved them off. We ended up leaving early. She didn't want to call an ambulance or anything, but she insisted I drive her home. Fine. I helped her hobble to the car. The whole way she clung to me like I was her only lifeline. At this point I figured, okay, maybe it hurts worse than it looks. Still, something felt off. In the car, she started crying again. Not just about her ankle. She kept saying how scared she was, how she had a bad feeling, how people always leave when she needs them. I tried to calm her down, saying everything would be okay, and that I could help her get inside and maybe get some ice on it. She didn't want to go to her place, said it was too full of bad energy. So she asked if I could take her to mine, just for a bit. I didn't love the idea. I barely knew this girl, but I didn't want to be a jerk. It was already getting dark, and she looked like she was about to fall apart. We got to my apartment, and I got her set up on the couch with a pillow and a bag of frozen peas. She acted like it was some grand romantic gesture. Started talking about how rare people like me are. I just nodded, half listening, while texting my roommate that things were getting weird. She didn't stop talking. For hours. She cried a little, then laughed, then asked if I believed in soul bonds. Said she felt ours the second she saw me. I just kept giving vague answers, hoping she'd eventually ask for a ride home or fall asleep. She didn't. She kept asking me to touch her ankle, see if I felt the heat. I did, just to shut her up. But again, It wasn't swollen, not even red. I've rolled ankles in basketball before. I know what a real injury looks like. Hers was fine. Or she believed it wasn't. I couldn't tell which was worse. At some point, she asked if I had any candles. I gave her one from the bathroom. She lit it and started mumbling something under her breath. I was sitting at the edge of the room watching her sway back and forth in the candlelight like she was in some kind of trance. The frozen peas had melted completely. She didn't notice. Around midnight, I finally told her I had to work early and that I could drive her home. She looked at me like I just slapped her. Her whole vibe changed. She got quiet. Then she said she couldn't go back to her place, that it wasn't safe. She didn't explain what that meant, just kept staring at me with these wide, glassy eyes. I told her I could call someone else, a friend, a cab, anything. She said no one else cared about her the way I did. She kept repeating that over and over. I ended up calling a rideshare app behind her back, told the driver to meet me down the street, and pretended I was taking her for a walk to clear her head. I carried her part of the way because she refused to walk on her injured ankle. The second she saw the car, she freaked out, screamed, full on, like I was kidnapping her. Neighbors opened their windows. The driver almost drove off, but I explained she was having a panic attack and just needed help getting home. He hesitated, then let her in. She gave me this look, like betrayal and heartbreak all rolled into one. Then she slammed the door and they drove off. I blocked her number the next day. That was 3 months ago. I haven't seen her since. But about once a week, I find a candle on my doorstep. Same kind, same weird smell. No note, no message. And every time I light one, it goes out. Immediately. I didn't even want to go on the date in the first place. That's how this started. I had just gotten out of something weird with a guy who ghosted me after 3 weeks of texting like we were married, and I wasn't in the mood to meet anyone new. But my friend Mia wouldn't stop pushing. She said I needed to get back out there, that I was too in my head lately. So fine. I downloaded the app again. I matched with this guy named AJ after 2 days. He looked normal. Not model hot, but kind of soft in the face in a comforting way, wore flannels in most of his pictures, smiled with his teeth. Something about him seemed safe, or at least not sketchy. We messaged for 3 days, mostly joking about dumb stuff like our shared hatred for voice notes and people who clap when planes land. He didn't pressure me to meet up, so I figured he wasn't a creep. I suggested coffee. He asked if we could do something a little more fun. He had this idea for an arcade bar that just opened downtown. I wasn't that into the idea of drinking on a first date, but I looked it up and it actually looked cool. Neon lights, old school games, slushy cocktails. So I agreed. The plan was to meet at 6. I got there first. He was only 5 minutes late, which is actually early in dating app time. He showed up out of breath like he had sprinted from the parking lot, but he was smiling. He said he was just nervous. That should have been the first red flag, but I smiled back and said something like, "Don't worry, I don't bite." We got our drinks. I went for something simple, a frozen rum and Coke slushie. He got this bright blue thing that looked like melted candy and smelled like mouthwash. We played Pac-Man, skee-ball, and this weird Japanese drumming game that I couldn't figure out. The first 30 minutes were fine. He laughed too loud at his own jokes, but he wasn't rude or handsy or anything. I actually thought it might be going well. Then it started to shift. Around the time we sat down in the corner booth to eat those greasy arcade nachos, he started looking pale. Not in a sick way at first, just like maybe the lighting was weird. But then I noticed he wasn't eating. He was holding his cup with both hands like he was bracing himself. He was sweating. Not a lot, but enough to notice. I asked if he was okay. He said he was just nervous. That's when it happened. He turned toward me like he was about to say something, and then he just threw up. On me. Full on, mouth open, no warning. All over my lap and legs and part of my hand. It wasn't a little. It wasn't a drunk hiccup and a bit of splash. It was everything he'd eaten that day. Probably the day before, too. It smelled like sour milk and fake blueberries, and something worse I couldn't place. I sat there frozen. People turned and stared. Some moved away. AJ looked horrified. Like eyes wide, face blank, not even blinking. He said something about being nervous again, like it was a real excuse for projectile vomiting on a stranger during nachos. And then he did it again. Right there, this time into a napkin that barely caught any of it. His drink tipped over. The cup rolled off the table. More people got up and left. I finally stood up, covered in his puke, and walked to the bathroom. I didn't even say anything to him. What was I supposed to say? The women's bathroom was empty, thank God. I had to use a hand dryer to half dry the front of my jeans. There were flecks of something on my shoe I didn't want to look at too closely. I stayed in there for 20 minutes. He didn't text. He didn't knock on the door. Nothing. When I came back out, he was still there. He had wiped the table off with napkins and stacked the leftover food containers like it made up for what just happened. He looked like he was about to cry. He said something about nerves again and how it's happened before on dates, but usually not that bad. He asked if we could start over sometime. I just walked past him and left. Didn't even answer. I got to my car and sat there for 10 minutes in silence, trying not to gag from the smell still stuck on my jacket. My phone buzzed with a text from him. He said he hoped I didn't think he was weird or gross, and that he felt a connection. I blocked the number. That should have been it, right? A week later, I found out he followed me on every single social media platform I had. He sent me messages from different accounts saying things like, "I'm not usually like that," and "You're the only one who stayed." He made a playlist with my name in the title and sent it to me twice. I reported the accounts, but new ones kept showing up. Always something slightly off about the profile pictures. Slightly off-center. Cropped too close. I thought it would stop eventually. That he'd get bored. But then he started tagging me in posts that weren't even visible, just gray squares with captions like, "She was kind." I kept blocking and reporting. No one really believed it was that serious, because nothing he said was threatening. Just weird. Off. Obsessive. It's been 3 months. I moved, changed my usernames, deleted the app, and still, every once in a while, I'll get a message from some new blank account. No profile picture, no followers, just one message. "I'm sorry I messed up our first date. It doesn't even creep me out anymore. I'm just tired." I'm not the kind of person who usually agrees to dinner at someone's house for a first date. It always feels like too much, too soon. Like, I don't even know your last name, and now I'm supposed to just sit at your table and pretend this is normal? But I'd been single for over a year, and I was tired of the same restaurants and fake conversations with people who already had one foot out the door. I met Ella on an app. She had this calm, almost serious vibe in her photos. One picture was her in a long coat, with a mug of tea on a balcony, and another one showed her holding a book next to a bunch of dried flowers. Her bio said she loved animals, cooking, and quiet nights. She didn't use emojis. That somehow made her seem more grounded. I messaged first. She replied quickly, and we ended up talking for hours that night about everything from bad dates to horror movies to weird foods we tried as kids. A few days later, She asked if I'd like to come over for dinner. Said she liked cooking for people. She found interesting. I was flattered, I guess. It felt more personal than some overpriced sushi bar. She lived in this older neighborhood about 30 minutes away, kind of tucked behind a community garden and a row of old bookstores. I got there around 6. It was cold, and the sky was already dark. Her apartment was cozy in a way that felt carefully curated. Not messy, but definitely lived in. Dim lighting, a few houseplants, a record playing something slow and crackly in the background. There were dried herbs hanging by the window and old cookbooks stacked near the stove. The whole place smelled earthy, like wood, oil, and something sharp I couldn't quite place. Ella greeted me like we'd known each other for years. She didn't hug me, didn't ask how traffic was, just told me to take off my shoes and offered me wine. I said sure. The glass was already full when she handed it to me. We sat in her living room for a bit, chatting about nothing. She asked if I had allergies. I said no. She nodded like that was exactly what she hoped I'd say. Eventually, she got up and said dinner was ready. She didn't ask if I wanted to help. Just told me to follow her into the kitchen. The table was already set. 2 plates, cloth napkins, a single candle in a brass holder. There was this heavy smell in the air, like roasted meat, but not beef or pork. It was richer, but also slightly off. I didn't say anything. I figured it was just a new spice or something I wasn't used to. I'd had lamb maybe twice in my life. It could have been that. She brought out the food herself. A thick cut of meat, seared perfectly, topped with herbs I didn't recognize. On the side, roasted root vegetables, and something that looked like spiced lentils. It actually looked amazing. It smelled intense, but not gross. She poured more wine. I started eating. The texture was different. Chewy in some parts, softer in others. The taste wasn't bad, just unfamiliar. Slightly sweet, but also heavy. Almost like liver, but less bitter. I kept chewing, nodding politely, trying not to make a face. I asked what kind of meat it was. She smiled and told me to guess. I laughed awkwardly. I said I wasn't great at identifying food on the fly. She said she'd tell me after dessert. That should have been enough for me to stop eating, but I didn't. I finished the whole plate, mostly out of politeness, maybe a little out of curiosity. Dessert was something, with figs and cream that she served in tiny cups. Also very good. I asked again what the meat was. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Horse." I thought she was joking at first. I actually laughed and waited for her to correct herself, but she didn't. She repeated it, said she found a supplier online, someone who imported specialty meat, said it was legal in certain countries, and that it wasn't a big deal. She said it like she was proud, like she expected me to say it was the best thing I'd ever eaten. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't angry at first, just confused. I didn't know if I should be sick or impressed. I mean, it was weird, really weird, but I'd already eaten it. It wasn't like she tricked me into eating glass or poison. It was just meat, technically. But it didn't sit right. Not just because it was horse, but because she waited until I ate it to tell me. She went on this long tangent about how food is political, how people are brainwashed to love some animals and eat others. She asked if I would have reacted the same, if it were rabbit or goat. She said horse meat had been demonized by Western culture, but it was considered a delicacy in parts of Europe and Asia. I wasn't really listening. My stomach was already starting to turn. I stood up and thanked her for the meal. She looked a little disappointed, like she thought I'd be more open-minded. I said I had an early meeting and needed to get going. She walked me to the door without saying much. Her last words were something like, "Let me know if you change your mind about all this." I didn't respond. I sat in my car for a long time before I started the engine. I wasn't sure if I was going to throw up or not. I didn't. But I felt off. Not just grossed out, violated kind of. I deleted the app when I got home, blocked her number. I never told anyone about it in detail. Just said the date was strange and left it there. That was about 5 months ago. She still emails me sometimes. Always from different addresses. Always short messages. Stuff like, "I hope you're doing well," or "still cooking," with a photo of some plated dish I don't recognize. I never reply. The last one I got was just a photo. A raw piece of meat on a wooden board. Still bleeding, no caption. I deleted it, but I swear I can still smell it. I probably should have known something was off when she said to meet her at a house party instead of a regular one-on-one date. I'd matched with this girl named Casey on Tinder. Blonde streaks in her hair, kind of artsy looking, and she had this oddly confident vibe in her texts that made it feel like she already knew me somehow. She replied fast, asked weird questions like how fast I could run, or whether I liked cats more than people. But she was hot, so I didn't really think about it too much. We talked for maybe 2 days before she invited me to a party her friends were throwing. She said it would be fun and chill and that I should bring something to drink but not too much, because she didn't like sloppy guys. I figured it'd be more relaxed than a dinner or drinks thing, and maybe we'd end up hanging out alone anyway. I said yeah. The place was about 15 minutes outside the city. I showed up around 9. It was a big white house with barely any furniture inside, just loud music, people I didn't know, and a weird smell like weed and pine cleaner. I didn't recognize anyone, which made sense. It was her party, not mine. I texted her that I was there, and she told me to come in and meet her in the kitchen. I walked in and kind of just stood there for a minute, looking around. The people there didn't really seem like they knew each other. A couple of small groups, talking in corners. One guy on the couch scrolling his phone alone. Nobody looked like they were having that much fun. It didn't feel like a real party. It felt like a waiting room with loud music. Then I saw her. She walked up to me like it was totally normal, like we'd known each other forever. She looked even better in person. Tall, with this really clean kind of look, like everything she was wearing had been planned out perfectly. She gave me this quick smile and said something about me being early, even though it was already after 9. I laughed and said I brought drinks. She took the bag from me and walked off without saying anything else, so I followed her. She led me into the kitchen, opened one of the beers I brought, and then just left. Walked right back out into the hallway. I thought maybe she forgot something, or wanted to show me around or whatever, so I followed her again. She went into the living room, sat on the arm of a chair, and started talking to another guy. Tall guy, messy hair, kind of looked like he was trying too hard with his outfit. They laughed about something. I stood there awkwardly, like I wasn't sure if I was supposed to stay or leave. Then I saw 2 other guys kind of standing near the kitchen door, watching her the same way I was. That's when I realized something wasn't right. More guys showed up over the next hour. Every single one of them looked like me. Not literally, but they were all in that same range. Average looking, early 20s, mostly wearing button-ups or hoodies, trying not to look too nervous. Every time a new guy came in, she'd greet him the same way she did with me. Smile, quick comment, disappear into another room. At one point, I asked someone near me how they knew Casey. He said they met on Tinder. So did the next guy I asked. And the next one. That's when it hit me. We were all from the app. All of us. I stopped counting at 8 guys, but there were definitely more. None of them were her friends. This wasn't a real party. It was a test. She was watching all of us. Like, actually watching. walking from room to room, sitting next to different guys, asking questions like it was a quiz. One guy she talked to for 10 minutes, then never looked at again. Another one she brought upstairs and came back down alone. One guy tried to leave, and she followed him to the door and convinced him to stay a little longer. I don't know why I didn't leave right away. Part of me wanted to see what would happen. The energy in the house was weird, tense, quiet under the music. Everyone kind of noticed what was happening, but no one wanted to be the first one to say it out loud. It felt like a trap, but a really slow one. Like if you moved wrong, something bad would happen. But you didn't know what that was yet. Eventually, she called us all into the living room. No joke, she stood on a chair and made an announcement. She said something about being open and looking for the right match, and how this was just her way of getting to know people better. She said she wasn't trying to waste anyone's time, and that we were free to leave if we didn't vibe with the setup. No one moved. She asked a few of us random questions in front of everyone. Stuff like how many kids we wanted, or if we believed in marriage. It wasn't playful. It was like a job interview, but worse, because we were all sitting there being judged while standing next to each other. One guy got up and walked out halfway, threw a question. She rolled her eyes and said, "He's not ready for real connection." I left a few minutes after that. Quietly. Didn't say goodbye. As I got to my car, I looked back and saw 2 more guys pulling up. They looked confused, holding 6-packs and wearing cologne. I almost warned them, but I didn't. I just drove home and blocked her number. She never texted, never followed up. A week later, a friend of mine who also uses Tinder said he matched with a girl who invited him to a small gathering to vibe and connect. I asked what her name was. It was Casey. Different photo, same vibe. He didn't go. I wasn't even supposed to go on the date that night. It was one of those boring Thursdays where I was stuck scrolling, not really looking for anything. I had an essay due the next day, my roommate was out, and I was just bored. That's when I matched with Ben. He seemed a little too smooth in the chat, the kind of guy who probably copy-pastes the same line to everyone. But I was in that mood where I didn't care. He asked if I wanted to grab boba. Said there was a place he liked a few blocks from campus that stayed open late. I figured, why not? I told myself I'd be home by 10. We met outside the shop around 8:30. He looked like his pictures, which was honestly already a win compared to some of the other disasters I've been through. Tall, dark hair, kind of soft-spoken in person. He kept looking around like he was nervous, but not in a shy way, more like he was checking something. I just figured maybe he didn't like being in crowded places. We ordered and sat near the window. He picked the booth where the light hit only on his side, like on purpose. He made small talk about school, asked a few questions, mostly surface level. I started to think maybe he was just one of those quiet, mysterious types. About 10 minutes in, I noticed he kept glancing down at his phone. Not casually either, like he was checking something important every few seconds. Then I noticed the phone was slightly tilted. The camera was pointing in my direction, propped up against his cup. I asked if he was texting someone. He just said he was checking something for his friend and put the phone face down. But I'd already seen it. His screen was on Instagram. I recognized the live interface. I told myself I was overthinking. People stream stupid stuff all the time. Maybe he was showing people the boba place. Maybe it was nothing, until he picked the phone up again, turned it sideways for a second, and kept glancing at the screen like he was reading something. That's when I leaned forward a bit and saw what was actually going on. He was live on Instagram, streaming our date, and I wasn't supposed to know. He had one AirPod in, probably to hear what people were saying without playing it out loud. The screen had a stream of comments, most of them moving too fast to read. But I caught a few. They were about me, about what I looked like. Some of them were laughing. Others were giving numbers, literally rating me. Out of 10. There was a pinned comment from him at the top. He had typed something like, "First date with a 6. What do you think?" I felt my stomach drop. I could barely read after that. I just remember the words, mid, and definitely catfished. I sat there frozen. It was like my body knew something disgusting was happening before my brain fully caught up. He had this fake interested look on his face while still checking the screen every few seconds, probably reacting to the comments, maybe even laughing on mute. He'd nod like he was listening to me, but his eyes were on the numbers, the ratings, the strangers picking me apart in real time like I was a joke, and I was just sitting there. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't know how. I started, breathing shallow, just trying not to cry or flip the table. He was watching me, and hundreds of people were watching him watch me. My face was probably the thumbnail. I wasn't even wearing makeup. I'd thrown on a hoodie and some mascara. I thought I was just meeting a guy for tea. I stared at his phone. He noticed. For a second, he hesitated like he wasn't sure if I'd seen too much. Then he smiled. That weird half-smile guys do when they know they've been caught but think they can play it off. That's when I got up. I didn't say anything. I just grabbed my bag and left. He didn't follow. He didn't even call after me. When I got outside, my hands were shaking. I sat on the curb and opened Instagram. I didn't even follow him, but I found his profile fast. It was public. His recent story said, "Live in 10 minutes. Don't miss this one." I clicked on the live. It was still going. The camera was still aimed at the booth, now just showing his face as he scrolled. The comments were blowing up. People were laughing about me walking out. Someone said she saw the phone LMAO. Another said W for Ben. I closed the app, blocked him, reported him. I don't even know if Instagram did anything about it. I stayed up the whole night thinking about it. Not just the stream, not just the comments, but how casual it all was, how normal it felt to him. Like filming a stranger on a date without telling them, mocking them live, letting other people join in. That was just entertainment. For him, it was content. For me, it was humiliating. The next day, I deleted the dating app. A week later, my friend sent me a TikTok someone made stitching his stream. Apparently, it had been reposted. It had hundreds of thousands of views. I was in it. My face. My voice. They blurred it a little, but it was still me. Someone added sound effects over it. Another girl duetted it pretending to be me, saying dumb, things I never said. I turned off my phone for 3 days after that. I still don't know if that was the first time he did it, or just the first time someone walked out. He probably thought he was being clever, making content, testing reactions, trying to go viral. I wasn't even a person to him. Just a number, a clip, something to laugh at for 5 seconds. That was 3 months ago. I haven't been on another date since. Honestly, I wasn't even that excited about the date at first. I'd matched with Chelsea a few days earlier on the app, and from the start, she seemed chill enough in our messages. Nothing wild, just regular back and forth about casual stuff. Favorite music, weekend plans, that kind of thing. She didn't bombard me with texts or expect instant replies, which was refreshing. So when she suggested dinner at this small, kind of artsy spot near my place that I'd never been to, I thought sure, why not? I was hoping it'd be a nice, easy night where we could just hang out, talk, and get to know each other without any pressure. The place was actually pretty cool inside. Dim lighting, wooden tables, walls covered in little paintings and prints, very much that indie, cozy vibe. There were plants everywhere, some hanging from the ceiling, others in big pots by the windows. It wasn't a crazy fancy restaurant, but it wasn't a dive bar either. It felt like the kind of place where you could spend a couple of hours just relaxing without feeling rushed. We got there around 7, found a spot near the back and ordered some food. I went with a burger and fries. She picked a pasta dish. The menu was small but interesting. Lots of vegetarian options and quirky cocktails. At first, the conversation went smoothly. Chelsea was funny and seemed genuinely interested in what I was saying. I liked that she wasn't glued to her phone, or distracted. She made eye contact, asked questions, and seemed engaged. The kind of stuff that makes you think, maybe this could actually work. We talked about music, travel, our jobs, random little stories from childhood. There was a warmth to her voice, and she laughed easily, which made me feel comfortable. But even then, there was this tiny tension hanging in the air, like something was just a little off. I couldn't put my finger on it exactly. She smiled, a lot, but sometimes it felt forced, like she was trying to keep up a facade or waiting for me to say the wrong thing. I shrugged it off as first date nerves, or maybe I was just overthinking it. We finished our food, and then came that awkward moment when the waiter brought the bill. Chelsea reached into her bag like she was going to pull out her wallet, but then she just stopped. She said she forgot it. Just like that. No hesitation, no awkward apology, just, "Oh, I forgot it." Her tone was casual, almost like it was no big deal. I looked at her, a little surprised. Usually, people get flustered or at least say something like, "Sorry, can you cover me this time?" But she didn't seem worried or embarrassed at all, which made it feel weirder. I told her it was cool. I'd pay for it. It was just dinner after all. No big deal, right? I handed over my card, and she gave me this grin like she'd just won something. That's when things started to shift. As we left the restaurant, Chelsea kept joking about how I owed her now. Like paying for dinner wasn't just a nice gesture, but a debt she was keeping track of. At first, I laughed it off. I mean, yeah, she was teasing, right? But then she kept pushing it. She started making comments that sounded less like jokes and more like expectations. "So, you know you'll have to take me out again now," she said, winking. "I'm expensive, but you don't mind, do you?" I chuckled, trying to keep the mood light, but I could feel my smile faltering. Something about it didn't sit right with me. I told her honestly that I wasn't sure about a second date. I wanted to see how the first one went before deciding if there would be a next. That's when her smile dropped completely. It was like the temperature around her changed. Suddenly, Chelsea got cold. The playful vibe disappeared, replaced by something sharp and uncomfortable. She started accusing me of not being a gentleman, saying that paying for dinner meant something, that it showed I was interested, and if I wasn't, maybe I wasn't worth her time. Her voice was low, serious, almost like a challenge. I sat there, caught in this weird mix of feeling manipulated and not wanting to cause a scene. I wasn't sure how to say no, without making it awkward or looking bad. It felt like she was controlling the situation by using the money I'd spent against me, twisting a simple dinner into some kind of moral test. I kept telling myself this couldn't be real. Maybe she was joking. Or maybe the alcohol was messing with her mood. But her stare didn't waver. It was like she expected me to change my mind, to confess some secret interest or guilt. We stood outside the restaurant for a few minutes after that, and I realized I was stuck. Chelsea wasn't going to let it go. Her tone was serious now, no longer playful or teasing. She watched me closely, waiting for me to say something different. I just wanted to leave. Eventually, I told her I had to get going. She didn't say anything else. Just watched me walk away with this expression that didn't quite make sense. Half disappointed, half triumphant, maybe even a little angry. I didn't hear from her again. The whole night stuck with me after that. Not because of how fun it was, or how well the date went, but because of that weird feeling of being trapped in a conversation I never wanted to have. The way she flipped from playful to cold in seconds, using the dinner bill like it was a debt I had to pay. It wasn't just about the money. It was how she made me feel responsible for something I hadn't agreed to, like she was collecting favors and keeping score. That feeling of manipulation was disturbing in a way I hadn't expected from a first date. Looking back, I'm still not sure what she was really after that night. Maybe she was testing me to see how far I'd go. Maybe she just liked the power trip, knowing she could put me on the spot. Or maybe she thought this was how dating was supposed to work, a game of who's got the upper hand. Either way, I learned fast that some jokes are just traps, and sometimes the easiest way to lose yourself on a date is by trying to keep someone else happy. Since then, I haven't gone on another date like that. I'm more cautious now. Sure. I try to read between the lines and watch for those little signs. The forced smiles, the sudden shifts in tone, the way someone talks about money or favors. It's not about being suspicious of everyone, but about protecting myself from ending up in a situation where I feel cornered or used. I want to enjoy dating again, but I'm more careful about who I trust with my time and my money. I never thought I'd end up in a situation where I wished I had just stayed home and binged Netflix instead of going out. It started out like any other date. A guy named Dino, someone I'd met on a dating app, seemed cool enough. He was funny in his messages, and he suggested we hang out at his place for dinner. Nothing fancy, just casual. I figured it'd be better than a loud bar or some crowded cafe where you can't hear yourself think. Plus, his place was close by, so it felt chill and low pressure. When I got there, his apartment was weird in a way that didn't immediately set off alarms. It was kind of messy, a bit cramped, with random stuff stacked on shelves and a few plants that looked like they were barely surviving. The lighting was low and warm, like he wanted it to feel cozy. He showed me around a bit, the kitchen where he said he'd cook, the living room with an old couch and a big TV, and a bedroom that had clothes hanging everywhere. Honestly, it looked like he didn't really care about tidying up, which I usually wouldn't mind. Sometimes I like a little chaos. Dinner was simple. He made spaghetti with some sauce he said he made himself. It wasn't bad, though I was mostly distracted by how he kept fiddling with his phone and occasionally glancing around like he was checking something. I thought maybe he was just nervous or waiting for a message, so I didn't say anything. I wanted to be polite. After dinner, things got weirder. He asked if I wanted to see some photos he'd taken recently. I thought that was normal, you know. People like to share pictures of their trips or pets or whatever. But when he pulled out his phone, he showed me a few pictures that looked like they were taken secretly. There was a blurry shot of someone's feet under a table, another from behind a curtain, and one weird one where it looked like someone was in a bathroom. But the photo was taken from a weird angle. I felt my stomach drop, but I didn't want to freak out just yet. I laughed nervously and said maybe those were some odd shots, but he just shrugged and said he liked to take candid photos of people. Then he asked if I wanted to see his computer. I thought maybe he was trying to impress me, so I followed him into his bedroom where his laptop was on a cluttered desk. When he opened it, a few folders popped up. One was labeled Private Collection, and inside were dozens of photos of girls. Some were close-ups, some were full body, but all looked like they were taken without the subjects knowing. My heart was pounding, and I froze, staring at the screen. Before I could say anything, he got up and walked out of the room. I stayed behind, eyes glued to the screen. I started scrolling through the files, and that's when I noticed timestamps on the photos. Some were from last week, some just a few days ago. There were pictures from his living room, his bathroom, and even the bedroom. It was like he had cameras set up around his apartment, snapping pictures without permission. I felt sick. My mind was racing. What if some of those photos were taken from times he'd had other girls over? What if I was next? I looked up from the computer and scanned the room again, trying to find something obvious like a camera or a lens. That's when I saw a tiny black dot in the corner of the bookshelf. A lens, barely noticeable if you weren't looking for it. My throat went dry. I didn't know how to react. I wanted to get out, but I didn't want to cause a scene or make things worse. I told myself I'd just play it cool, grab my stuff, and leave as fast as possible. I pretended to be interested in the photos while slowly moving toward the door. That's when I heard a faint clicking sound coming from the hallway. It was like a camera shutter. I stopped dead. He was coming back with a small device in his hand, a remote control for his cameras, no doubt. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. Without thinking, I grabbed my purse and made a break for the door. He called out to me, but I didn't stop. I got out of the apartment, ran down the stairs, and didn't look back until I was on the street. Only then did I feel safe enough to breathe. I didn't answer his messages after that. I blocked him, everywhere. But the thing that creeps me out the most is knowing that for a while, I was living inside someone's camera lens, without even realizing it. He had built this whole setup, just waiting to capture moments I thought were private, moments I thought I was sharing only with him. Sometimes I wonder if those photos are already uploaded somewhere, if strangers are looking at pictures of me without my permission. It's a sick kind of violation that I can't forget. I've never been back to that neighborhood, and I never plan to. I still get paranoid about cameras in public bathrooms or Airbnb rentals. I'm way more careful now about where I go and who I trust. That night was supposed to be just a simple dinner, but it turned into something else entirely. Something that made me question everything about safety and privacy. No fancy ending here. Just a messed up reminder that sometimes the people who seem harmless can be the most dangerous. You ever go on a date and something just feels off, but you can't exactly put your finger on it? Like, it's not that she was rude or anything, but there was this weird energy that didn't make sense at first. That's exactly how it was with Cammie. The whole night started out normal enough. We agreed to meet at this local arcade downtown, a spot packed with neon lights, blinking machines, and the kind of vibe that's a little nostalgic, but also loud and chaotic. It wasn't your typical dinner or coffee date, which I liked. Something different. Something fun. The place was buzzing with people playing pinball, air hockey, and all sorts of vintage games, with music blasting from hidden speakers that made the whole space feel alive. When I saw Cammie, I thought she was cute in a sort of effortless way. She was dressed casually, but with a wild vibe to her look. Messy hair that looked like she'd just rolled out of bed, but in a way that somehow worked. And this laugh that cut through the noise and made the crowded room feel a little smaller, like we were in our own bubble. We jumped into an old-school racing game, trading turns, and I started to think maybe this was going to be a good night. We were both competitive but having fun, laughing at each other's mistakes. And for a moment, it felt like things were clicking. Then, out of nowhere, in the middle of one of my turns, she just growled at me, like a low, guttural sound that wasn't a joke or a laugh, but an actual growl. I blinked, caught off guard, thinking maybe it was some weird attempt at teasing or just part of her quirky personality. I smiled awkwardly, trying to ignore it, but the growl stuck with me. It was unexpected, jarring even. Then a few minutes later, while she was watching me miss a shot, she did it again. This time it wasn't playful. It was sharp and strange, like she was trying to act like some kind of animal. I glanced around to see if anyone else noticed, but everyone seemed wrapped up in their own games and the noisy chaos of the arcade. At first, I thought maybe she was messing with me or trying to be funny in some bizarre way. I mean, people do weird stuff on dates to break the ice, right? But the more time we spent there, the more frequent and intense the growling got. Sometimes it was just a quiet rumble under her breath. Other times a loud, sudden sound that made nearby players glance our way. I was caught between laughing it off and wanting to back away slowly. After a while, we decided to leave the arcade and grab some food at a late-night diner nearby. It was one of those classic spots with red vinyl booths, menus covered in grease stains, and flickering neon signs. Outside, the kind of place where the air smells like a mix of burnt coffee and old fries, and the jukebox plays tunes that never change. We slid into a corner booth, ordered some fries and burgers, and for a moment, it felt like things were back to normal. Again. I thought maybe the growling was just some weird thing that only happened when she was excited or competitive. Then, right in the middle of ordering fries, she growled again. But this time it was different. It sounded more like a warning than a joke. The waiter gave us a weird look, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment. I wasn't sure whether to apologize or just pretend it didn't happen. I started wondering if she had some kind of condition I'd never heard of, or if she was pretending for attention. The growling was weird enough on its own, but when it seemed to be directed at me, like a low warning or a threat, it threw me off even more. I tried to steer the conversation back to normal topics, favorite movies, music, stuff like that. But every time I asked a question, or tried to change the subject, she'd growl again. It was like a signal to stop. A strange way of setting boundaries that didn't quite fit with anything I'd ever experienced on a date. It was unnerving, like I was walking on eggshells and didn't even know it. The night got heavier after that. I was stuck in this weird place where I wanted to understand her, to figure out what was going on, but also wanted to get the hell out of there. The growls kept coming in random bursts, sometimes so quiet I barely noticed, other times loud, enough to draw attention. I couldn't tell if it was some kind of performance, or if she was struggling with something deeper. There was a wildness to her, but also a sadness that I couldn't quite reach. When we finally left the diner and walked back to her car, she growled one last time, loud and clear, right before opening the door. A few people nearby turned their heads, probably wondering what the hell was going on. I felt my heart rate pick up. It hit me then that this wasn't a joke or a quirky habit. Something about her just felt off, almost like she was someone else, underneath all of that. I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure if I was imagining things or if she'd snap at me if I did. I was stuck, trying to be polite, while the growls kept coming in these strange, unpredictable bursts. By the time I got home, I was replaying the whole night in my head. It was disturbing, not because anything violent happened, but because it was so unpredictable and unsettling. I couldn't figure out if she was messing with me, mentally unwell, or just completely strange in a way I wasn't ready for. The experience left me with this lingering unease that I couldn't shake. I found myself wondering what the hell was really going on behind those eyes. What kind of story she had that made growling at people her way of communicating or coping. Haven't seen or heard from Cammy since that night. I guess I just didn't want to be the guy who asks why a girl is growling at him on a first date. Sometimes you just walk away and hope you never have to explain that one to your friends. But I still think about it from time to time, wondering what was real and what was performance, and if she was okay. It's one of those weird dating stories you don't forget because it defies explanation. No big lesson here, just a reminder that sometimes people are way weirder than you expect, and that's enough to make a date straight up creepy. You can't always read people like a book. Sometimes they have chapters you didn't see coming. Thank you for watching till the end of the video. Now sit back, relax, and listen to an hour of calming rain sounds.